Hello and welcome to the 7th Annual Global Summit on Kidney Disease Innovations, titled The Decade of the Kidney at Midpoint, Opportunities and Barriers to Greater Innovation and Freedom from Disease and Disability. This annual event is proudly hosted by American Association of Kidney Patients in collaboration with our allied partners at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. My name is Christine Hernandez, and I'm honored to serve on the board of directors for the AAKP and represent an organization as a national ambassador for the state of Illinois. And I'm also a hemodialysis patient. I was diagnosed in 2016 with a really rare form of kidney disease called MUC1, which began my roller coaster, my journey. I'm a registered nurse by profession, but I've also learned much more about kidney disease through my personal experiences. But behind the scenes, there is so much more complexity. Each patient is unique and each journey is individual and different to everyone involved. Being involved in AAKP allows me to make a difference not only in my own life, but the lives of others. It has empowered me and helped me to empower others. AAKP is a wonderful organization that has been there for me and countless other kidney patients. It has given me a way to be part of something greater than my disease. Since 2019, the Global Summit has served the global kidney community as the largest patient-led kidney disease innovations summit in the world. This year's Global Summit marks a critical milestone because it's the midpoint of the AAKP-led initiative, the Decade of the Kidney. This global initiative has been mirrored across the world of kidney advocates, medical allies, government officials, and among people of goodwill committed to return of true patient-centered medicine. Throughout the first half of the decade of the kidney, we have raised awareness about the increasing burdens of kidney diseases worldwide among people, community, workforces, and government. This effort has also accelerated the determination to transcend status quo treatments, including brick and mortar dialysis, to the future of kidney care that will be determined by expansions in patient consumer choice, targeted therapies that stop or slow the progression of kidney disease and prevent kidney failure, greater access to donated organs, new devices, or alternative to human organs, including artificial wearable and implantable kidney xenotransplantation. We believe that the time is now, as we move through the next 5 years of this golden age of kidney medicine, where much progress has already been made for patients, care partners, clinicians, and researchers, innovators, industry, and government leaders to accelerate our bold actions to push forward modern diagnostics, devices, and therapeutics, and continue to remove outdated policies that block their adoption. No country is immune to the impacts of kidney disease, but the good news is every person watching has a role in shaping a future for all patients at risk or living with kidney disease that can offer more hope, outcomes, and greater independence and freedom from disease and disability. With that, I'm honored to serve as the moderator for our session entitled Highly Sensitized Kidney Patients Lead to New Insights on Risk, Tolerance, and Dominant Attribute. We are joined today by 3 outstanding speakers, industry representatives whose commitment to patient engagement has garnered unique insights that are helping advance their company's efforts to develop new solutions for an often overlooked group of kidney patients within the kidney community. To kick things off, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Ms. Hannah Saul serves as the Global Policy and Patient Advocacy Group Engagement Director at Hansa Biopharma. In this role, she focuses on developing patient-centered healthcare policies and building strong collaborations with advocacy groups to improve outcomes, particularly for highly sensitized kidney patients who live with rare diseases. Hannah will be joined shortly by a few of her colleagues who will bring additional perspective on how patient engagement is shaping innovation and insight in this important space. Hannah, over to you.
Thanks, Christine, for having us along, and thanks to AAKP and GW University for hosting this global summit. It's a pleasure to join you to discuss this example of patient research today. I'm Hannah Saul, the Global Policy and Patient Advocacy Group Engagement Director at Hansa, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this session on patient-centered innovation, understanding highly sensitized kidney transplant patient preferences. Since Hansa Biopharma started working in the kidney transplant space, we've looked into understanding the views of kidney transplant patients and working with the patient community. This patient preference study is a direct result of those early conversations and the realization that much of what we wanted to understand about patients had never been asked or captured before, and no one else knew it either. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer Leonard, the Director of US Field Clinical Research and Medical Affairs at Hansa, and by Geof Gray from our research partners, Syneos Health. I'll pass over to Jen to talk about highly sensitized kidney transplant and why we felt this study was needed.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you for having us today. Before we get into the discussion about what it means to be highly sensitized, I think it's important that we understand antibodies and their role in the immune system. So think of antibodies as a line of defense, so something that identifies foreign substances, things that are not self, and protects your body against those things. So throughout our lives, we're exposed to different foreign substances that could be bacteria, could be viruses, but we can also be exposed to cells or tissues that come from other human beings. When we're exposed to cells or tissues that come from other human beings, we make antibodies against human markers on those cells or tissues. So how does this happen? Or how do we get exposed to other cells or human tissues throughout our lives? Well, it's predominantly in three ways. It is through pregnancy, blood transfusions, or previous transplants. Let's go back to what does it mean to be highly sensitized. So when we say that a patient is highly sensitized, they basically have developed a high level of antibodies to these human markers on other cells from other human beings. So potentially, to make it simple, they've developed a high level of antibodies against other potential donors. So why is this important? Well, if you have a high level of antibodies, it could make it harder for you to find a compatible donor. Or if you have a compatible donor, it can cause you to reject the transplanted kidney. So your transplant team will manage immunosuppression to ensure that these antibodies are kept in check. So how do we measure this? How do you know your sensitivity status? Well, there's a test called a calculated panel reactive antibody score, or commonly known as CPRA. A CPRA basically depicts a percentage. It's a percentage of the population to which you're incompatible. So say, for example, you have a CPRA score of 70%, then you're incompatible with 70% of the donor population. The higher your CPRA score, the more sensitized you are, or the more donors to which you are incompatible. When we say that a patient is highly sensitized, globally, we define that patient as having a CPRA level of at least 80% or higher. So how big of a problem is this? So highly sensitized patients, or patients that have a high level of antibodies, face a significant unmet medical need and have a very hard time finding a compatible donor. If we put this into numbers and we look at Europe and the US, approximately 170,000 patients are waiting for a kidney across the US and Europe. With that, 10 to 15% of patients are considered highly sensitized or have a CPRA level of at least 80%. When we look at this from numbers perspective, this is approximately 20 to 20,000 patients globally. Now, the significant problem that they face is that as they wait for a compatible donor, many of these highly sensitized patients experience longer wait times. So 2 to 4 times the wait times from those that have or are not highly sensitized. They also tend to be removed from the wait list or die on the wait list before finding a compatible donor. The irony is that transplantation is the best treatment option for end-stage renal disease patients, including highly sensitized patients. So we have to do more to find compatible donors for these patients. The good news is that there are options if you're a highly sensitized patient. So first, kidney allocations globally tend to prioritize highly sensitized patients. So if there is a donor that matches a highly sensitized patient in their allocation system, they tend to try and make that transplant or facilitate that transplant between that donor and that recipient. Secondly, there's things called paired kidney exchange programs. So if a highly sensitized patient has a living donor, yet the two are incompatible, they can enter a paired kidney exchange program, and hopefully the donor of that recipient can donate to another person in the paired kidney exchange program, one to which they're more compatible. And the highly sensitized patient then can find a donor within the program to which they are compatible. Finally, there is a third option, and this is known as desensitization. And unlike the other two options where a compatible donor is usually used in the transplant process, desensitization occurs, and it is a treatment which simply reduces, removes, or inactivates antibodies for a period of time so that this can enable a transplant to occur. But this transplant is usually with an incompatible organ. So other medications, immunosuppression must be used, as with other transplants that are compatible, to deter the development of antibodies and prevent antibodies from reacting to the transplanted organ. With each of these options, there's risk and there's benefits for you to consider as a patient. As a company, we were very curious to understand that once highly sensitized patients understood their sensitization status, they also understood what it meant to be highly sensitized and were aware of their options and the risk and benefits of each. Hansa sought to understand what highly sensitized patients would prefer or consider to be important when they're considering their treatment options moving forward. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Geof from Syneos.
Thanks, Jen. So as Jen mentioned, the objective of the project was to understand what is important to people living with ESKD when deciding between two options. Option 1, remaining on dialysis, or option 2, proceeding with same-day desensitization and a HLA incompatible transplant. The project began with a commitment to working in partnership with patients. The first step was connecting with patient advocacy representatives. The advocacy groups provided critical guidance and co-authored the protocol to ensure the study took full advantage of the opportunity to collect data important to patients. We landed on a discrete choice experiment as the methodology. That's because it's a design that relies on direct input from a sample of the study population to define what the study will measure. Following the completion of the study protocol, a literature review was conducted to identify any concepts or attributes previously identified as important in the decision between continuing dialysis or opting for a transplant. Interviews were then conducted in partnership with the AAKP to elicit any factors important to patients and validate the importance of the attributes identified from the literature review. You can see here in the graphic that the literature review identified 30 attributes that were then thinned down to 13 attributes. We then ran an analysis on those 13 attributes after running the focus groups, and the outcome was that 5 attributes were identified as priorities for inclusion in the study. These are 5 attributes or factors that were important to patients when making that decision between continuing dialysis or opting for an incompatible transplant. The DCE and associated questions were then pre-tested and finalized for the final questionnaire. The study identified 5 attributes important in the decision between continuing dialysis and opting for an incompatible transplant. Hope was the most important and is an attribute not previously identified, making it a unique finding of the study. Hope was defined as having the same opportunity of a transplant as a non-sensitized patient and percolated to the top time and time again through the process of defining the attributes. Risk was defined as the risk associated with a transplant enabled by same-day desensitization and ranked second in importance. The difference in the acceptable level of risk associated with a transplant was an interesting finding from the comparison of HCP and patient data that was collected in the development of the discrete choice elements. HCPs believe a lower level of risk is more appropriate and may be underestimating the level of risk patients are willing to accept. More details on the study findings will be released during the World Transplant Conference in August. For now, this is all we can share. 99 people took part in the study. Mean waitlist time was 4.6 years, with a mean dialysis time of 5.8 years. 37% of participants had a previous transplant and 61% had discussed desensitization with their doctor. One of the objectives of the study was to ensure that those who participated were representative of the ESKD population who are highly sensitized. The data that has been collected really does show that it is possible to identify with those who took part in the study and therefore to be able to use the findings of the study to help make decisions about what is right for you. More data will be available soon, as I mentioned, from the World Transplant Conference in August. So with that, I'll pass back to Hannah.
Thanks, Geof. So in terms of next steps, as Geof says, we're committed to sharing the full results from the study as soon as we can, which will be the World Transplant Congress in August. We're also working with AAKP, who've been our partners throughout this whole project, to ensure that we can share the results with patients in a way that is most useful for them and to be able to impact their care as quickly as we possibly can. As Geof called out the attribute of hope, we very much hope that these results are valuable in increasing everybody's understanding of what highly sensitized kidney transplant patients value, and that this can help the whole patient community, patients, carers, doctors, and everyone impacting the healthcare system to improve the support, information, and treatment options that are available to highly sensitized kidney transplant patients. With that, I'd like to pass us back to Christine.
Thank you to our wonderful panel of speakers for your excellent presentation. Before we conclude, I'd like to ask each of you a few follow-up questions. I'd like to start with you, Geof. How does including patient voices improve the relevance of research outcomes for real-world needs, and specifically for the research with sensitized patients? What did you find most interesting you don't think would have been possible to gather if the study design was not informed by patients?
Understanding what's important to patients begins with patients. There's a lot of work that's been done in the past that has been very much around a group of HCPs sitting around a table and deciding what needs to be studied and why it needs to be studied. So for this particular piece of work, beginning with the intention of designing the study to understand and for it to be co-authored and then literally built on what is important to patients, the aim, the real value there is that the data can be applied in the real world, that people who are similar to those who participated in the study are going to be able to use that data to inform their own decisions, to understand where they fit in terms of their decisions about and what is important to them in regard to transplantation. Okay, so there's two parts to this. One, the lack of data about the experience of patients who are highly sensitized in the existing literature. And then secondly, the fact that hope has emerged as an attribute that isn't reported anywhere in the literature. The fact that we all know and understand and value hope, and for patients, we heard regularly through the interview process about hope and how they hope that their future would be better. The emergence of hope is just, and being able to quantify its importance, that I think is one of the really critical findings. And then with regard to risk, I think risk has actually opened up an opportunity to do additional research to better understand what the difference between the perception of risk on the part of HCPs and patients is, especially if there is a gap that's possibly preventing patients from accessing a transplant because of this perception of what level of risk is acceptable.
Thank you, Geof. To Hannah, as a kidney patient myself who is highly sensitized and struggling to find a donor match, it can be hard at times to maintain optimistic outlook. However, knowing that there are companies that recognize this unmet need for this unique portion of the kidney patient community and is striving to do something about it provides me and others in my situation with hope. In your opinion, how might advancement in desensitization transform transplant allocation?
Thanks, Christine. I think it's a really important point that as we think about the innovation and how it changes from here forward, that actually it does need to change the allocation system as well. Jen referenced the fact that the US allocation system in particular, but all over the world, prioritize highly sensitized patients, and that's fantastic. But actually, allocation systems are fundamentally set up to find compatible matches. And if we have options in the future to desensitize patients more easily, then incompatible matches need to be able to be found through the system as well. So there are some challenges and some changes that I think all allocation systems need to look at. In relation to the US system, there are also some metrics that are used by the system that drive certain behaviors by transplant centers, which deprioritize to some degree patients who are highly sensitized. There are lots of patients who don't know that they're highly sensitized. One of the challenges with this study was actually finding patients to participate, because we needed patients who knew that they were highly sensitized, and not all patients knew that or didn't know it by that phrase. So even knowing their status and knowing therefore that they have other options and whether their transplant center treats highly sensitized patients is something that's incredibly important to patients. And as we move forward with scientific and medical innovation, that needs to keep pace.
Thank you, Hannah. That's excellent insight. And over to Jen. As innovative treatments for sensitized patients emerge, it's important to the AAKP to ensure any existing or perceived barriers to care choice and access are overcome. How might arbitrary or varying thresholds on who qualifies as a highly sensitized patient negatively impact this kidney population by denying access to new desensitization therapies? And how can we work together as a community to overcome that?
Thank you for that question, and it's a very important one. Actually, what we do know is highly sensitized patients can have varying level of antibodies from anywhere from 80% or higher. And the higher the antibody levels, it becomes very hard for them to find a compatible donor, as I stated in my presentation. But apart from this, apart from being highly sensitized, there's other patient factors that come to play here that further limit access of patients to transplantation. These factors could be a rare blood type. It could be disease status. It could be whether or not you have diabetes. These other factors are important to consider along with being highly sensitized, but they further the burden of finding, or they contribute to limiting access to finding a compatible organ. So we need to amplify the voice of the patient. Everyone, regulatory agencies need to understand that patients are individual and that we need to consider all aspects of patients when we're trying to find a compatible donor for a specific patient. So again, we need to amplify the patient's voice. We need to ensure that we're heard through changes in policy. And again, we need the backing of patients, healthcare providers, the transplant community, and patient advocacy groups to ensure that we're benefiting as many patients as possible that experience this unmet need. Thank you.
And finally, to end with Hannah and Jennifer, the kidney community has witnessed progress made in kidney science and medicine since the start of the decade of the kidney in 2020. Over the next 5 years, where do you hope innovation and desensitization treatments and protocols will take us?
Again, thank you for that question. Very insightful. And as we move forward into the future and we have innovations with desensitization, I think our hope is that we're able to benefit as many patients as possible who are highly sensitized and experience this limited access to transplant. So the hope is that, again, moving forward, we can identify those patients with this unmet need and hopefully benefit them.
I think I'd add to what Jen said in the hope for the next 5 years has got to be about patient access. It's got to be patient empowerment, highly sensitized patients knowing that they are highly sensitized, being routinely told that they are highly sensitized, what that means, and given their options so that patients aren't operating in a vacuum, physicians making all the choices for them. This should not be a paternalistic process where the patients have no input. Patients have very strong views, as we've seen in our study results. And you'll all see when we have them presented at WTC, they have strong views on what they want and what they believe is the best course of action for them. And their physicians need to have those conversations with the patients and make joint decisions together.
Thank you, Hannah. And Jennifer, as a sensitized kidney patient, this type of innovation can't come soon enough. As we conclude our session, I'd like to extend our gratitude to our friends from Hansa and Syneos Health for joining us. The information you've shared today has helped illuminate the complex challenges faced by highly sensitized patients, as well as strategies to better support their needs.